The Seattle Kraken may just have the one player, but now they also have the second overall pick. Let's go! What's cracking, everybody? I'm Scott, and this is the show where we talk all about what's been going on with the Seattle Kraken. And it's been quite a while since we did one of these. So long, in fact, that we haven't had a chance yet to talk about the first player to sign with the Kraken in Luke Henman. But before we get to that, there is a little bit more as far as small news that I want to go over real quick first. Over the last couple of weeks, we saw some announcements from Climate Pledge Arena and the Kraken themselves regarding some of the food and beverage options that will be available in the arena. Of course, we already knew that Coors was going to be the craft beer sponsor, and again, that doesn't mean that Coors Light is going to be the only beer you can get at games. But as far as food, we hadn't really seen much until now. We got a little bit more of a list of some of the names that we'll see there, which includes Metropolitan Grill, Elliot's Oyster House, Little Woody's, Ballard Pizza, Din Tai Fung, Just Poke, and Hop Valley Craft Beer, which, again, we kind of already knew was going to be the craft beer of the stadium, or at least one of them, considering the partnership with Coors, who owns Hop Valley. So, at least as far as that food list is concerned, it does seem like they're off to a pretty strong start there. Personally, I'm not super into poke or oysters, but I know there's a lot of people that do like those things, and both of them are pretty unique as far as stadium food is concerned, so it seems like they're definitely, again, thinking outside the box like they said they would be when it comes to what you can get to eat at the stadium. And then the other announcement we saw was that Modelo is going to be the import beer sponsor. Again, this doesn't mean that you're only going to get Coors Light and Modelo. All this means is that if you really wanted, say, Corona or Pacifico, you're probably not going to be getting that at Climate Pledge Arena, so just going to have to watch the game from home if you really want to watch hockey along with one of those for some reason. I mean, personally, I like Corona, the beer, obviously not the virus, but I'm not sure that the beer that's known for being a beach beer is going to go particularly well with hockey, but teach their own. Of course, since the last time we did one of these videos, again, one of the biggest pieces of news, which I didn't get to because I just kind of had a lot going on at the time and it fell through the cracks, was that the Kraken finally signed their first player in a guy named Luke Henman. Henman is a 21-year-old center who has spent the last few years in the QMJHL, where he plays for the Armada, or at least played for the Armada anyway. They recently just had their season come to an end as they got knocked out in the second round of the playoffs by tiebreaker to one of the teams that is currently in the final series, in fact, the team that's leading it, the Tigers. Regardless, though, of where he's been playing or if he ends up in the AHL this next season, Henman ended up in Seattle after being picked by the Carolina Hurricanes in the 2018 entry draft with the 96th overall pick, which was in the 4th round. Of course, Carolina ended up not signing him, so he became a free agent, and that's how Seattle ended up picking him up. And I know what you might be thinking hearing that he was drafted by the Hurricanes, but no, he was not a Ron Francis draft pick. He was picked by the Hurricanes just after Francis left, but as you may or may not remember, the Seattle Kraken do have a number of ex-Hurricane employees on their staff currently, which includes Robert Cron, who is the director of amateur scouting, who was with the Hurricanes when Henman was picked, and is definitely one of the more advocate proponents of Henman's play. Henman's listed at 6 foot 170 pounds, but he has been trying to put on more weight over the last few years and has been able to do that at least over the last couple of years, so he probably will be playing heavier than that in years to come. He's a pretty decent skater and a pretty good, smart, all-around type of player. And of course, one of the things you worry about with a guy who's trying to add weight is whether or not he can continue to skate at the level that he has been up to this point. But at least looking at Henman's stats over the last few years, it seems like he has been able to keep up the production at the very least that he was able to early on when he was maybe going a little bit lighter than he is now. But whether or not it has anything to do with the added weight, or maybe it's just the addition of that C on his chest as he has been the captain for the Armada over the last 2 seasons, the last 2 years in the QMJHL have definitely been his best. He started as a pretty respectable point scorer with 47 and then 46 points in just over 60 games in each of his first 2 seasons, but then had over a point per game with 74 points on 25 goals and 49 assists last year in 63 games, and then this year continued to be over a point per game with 43 points in 32 games on 16 goals and 27 assists. And of course was also able to continue that in the playoffs this year, where he had 12 points in 9 games on 9 goals and 3 assists. So not just over a point per game, but also scoring a goal per game in the playoffs, which is also a pretty good sign. But maybe Henman's most important trait, and certainly one of the ones that played a big role in him getting signed by the Kraken, especially as the franchise's first player to sign, is his leadership ability, which has been praised at every level along the way, and of course has been rewarded with him again being the captain of his team for the last 2 years. And during Henman's introductory press conference with Ron Francis and Henman back when he was signed, Francis was sure to mention that it was this leadership quality that played a large role in why Henman was the first player the Kraken signed, as he is very much the type of player that you would want representing your franchise. Of course, whether or not he ends up making it to the NHL level still is very much up in the air. He does kind of project as a type of guy that could end up being a depth forward in the NHL down the road, but probably isn't super likely to be heading up a first or second line at any point, unless he does improve quite a bit over the next few years, or maybe just takes off in the AHL if he gets a chance there. Regardless of how much, or even if he does end up contributing for the Kraken at the NHL level in years to come, there's one thing that you cannot take away from Henman, and that is the fact that he is the best player in franchise history without a doubt, and for the last few weeks has been every fan's favorite player in franchise history as well, so he definitely does have a strong resume already. Of course, the other big piece of news that happened for the Kraken, and happened a little bit more recently than Henman signing, is the fact that Seattle participated in its first NHL event as a franchise, that being the NHL Entry Draft Lottery. Going into the lottery again, the Kraken were slotted into that number 3 spot with just over a 10% chance at that first overall pick. And with this year, again, them dropping it from 3 to 2 teams that are lotteried up towards the top, that meant the farthest the Kraken could fall was 5th. But as you likely know by now, the Kraken ended up being the only team to move up, as they will now be picking 2nd overall in the entry draft on July 23rd. In the end, this ended up being a pretty interesting draft lottery, mostly in that relatively it was a pretty boring one. Obviously, unless you're a Seattle Kraken fan and this was the first big Kraken event, or you're a Buffalo Sabres fan and you ended up with the first overall pick. But the Kraken were the only team to move up in the draft, and only the Ducks moved down, as the Kraken swapped places with them, taking that, again, 2nd overall pick, while the Ducks will now be picking 3rd. But outside of Seattle and Anaheim flipping spots, again, every other team, including Buffalo at the number 1 spot, stayed exactly where they were supposed to by the odds, which definitely has not happened very often, if at all, when it comes to the NHL draft lottery, where usually a couple of teams do jump up towards the top there, as the first pick does not often go to the team that ended up with the worst record. Now, I actually think that the number 2 spot is a very good one for Seattle to be in, potentially even the best spot. The closest guy there is to a consensus first overall pick in this draft is Owen Power, who is a defenseman from the University of Michigan. He probably goes to Buffalo again because he's the most sure thing as a future NHLer is concerned in this draft, which is not particularly top-heavy, but is fairly deep. So then, assuming Power does go number 1 overall to Buffalo, which I think is fairly likely, even if Buffalo is a bit of a wild card considering they don't have much of a scouting department, even if scouting has been quite a bit of a challenge over the last year, then that does leave a number of interesting young forwards for Seattle to pick from in the number 2 spot. Now, it is fair to mention that with his experience in Carolina, Seattle's GM Ron Francis has shown that he likes to pick defensemen in the first round and build a team from the back up. However, as I've said a number of times in the expansion draft series, if you've been keeping up with that, the Kraken are likely to come out of this expansion draft pretty solid on the defensive end, and definitely quite a bit more lacking on the forward end, especially when it comes to top 6 and especially top line type of forwards. Especially at the center position, which is where a guy like Matthew Beniers could definitely help. So at least at this point, Beniers does seem like the most likely pick in the number 2 spot for the Kraken, but he's certainly nowhere near as close to a lock in that spot as Power is in the number 1 spot for the Sabres. and that in and of itself is definitely not 100% either, so there's still plenty of wiggle room and different options that could happen here. Plus, there's also now the fact that we're going to have to wait and see what happens with this injury to Beniers that saw him leave the ice without putting weight on one of his feet less than 24 hours after the lottery happened. Fortunately, the only update we have up to this point is that he is now listed as day-to-day for Team USA, so hopefully that's a good sign that it isn't too serious, but still not a great sign when a guy isn't even trying to walk on it. Now, I definitely will try to get a video out that goes a little bit more into depth as far as what some of Seattle's options are in the entry draft coming up, and the only reason I say try is because that's going to be a pretty crazy week with the expansion draft just 2 days before it, but again, I will try to go a little bit more in depth with some of these guys down the road. But if Seattle weren't to go with Beniers at the number 2 spot for one reason or another, there are still a couple of other options as far as forwards that they could go with, including probably my favorite, William Eklund, or also Dylan Guenther. And there is also the chance that they end up going with a defenseman, even if Owen Power is taken at number 1. And if that's the route they decide to go, then Luke Hughes would probably be the second best option to Power. He probably has the best top end of any defenseman in this draft, or at least ceiling as far as what he could turn into, but certainly isn't as much of a sure thing as Power would look to be at the NHL level, largely because of his size difference to Power. But regardless of who the Kraken end up taking at number 2, again, for Kraken fans, this was a very, very cool event. Even if it wasn't the most exciting draft lottery or NHL event that's ever happened, the fact that, again, it was the first NHL event that the Kraken were officially a part of, it was really cool to see Seattle and Ron Francis as our GM up there along with all the other NHL teams and other NHL GMs. And definitely was another big step in making this feel every day like it's more and more real that we are going to get an NHL team here in just a few months. Again, this probably won't be the last time I end up talking about the entry draft before it does roll around on July 23rd. But if there is anybody that you would like to see Seattle get with that second overall pick in particular, do let me know about that down in the comments section. Again, this is a draft that is going to be a bit of a crapshoot because there isn't an obvious top end like there is in some drafts, like with Lafreniere last year. And again, teams haven't really been able to scout these guys very much over the last year, so it's going to be an interesting one for sure. So whether or not Seattle ends up getting the guy that you would like to see them pick, it's going to be really hard to tell whether or not it was a good pick until years down the road, even more so than usual. Plus, we will be just 2 days removed from the expansion draft, so there will be plenty of ways to distract yourself if you do find yourself disappointed with whoever they get with that second overall pick. That will, however, bring us to the end of this one, so if you have made it to this point, as always, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Luke Henman as the Kraken's first player and your favorite Kraken of all time, or who you'd like to see the Kraken get in the entry draft coming up with that second overall pick. Otherwise, stay safe out there and be good to each other.